Here's one from Net Hamilton. Question, Mondo, what does the late hour actually mean biblically? Looks like she's saying speaking. What does that we're in the late hour? What does
Is
that
she
mean?
referencing a specific Bible verse?
I don't have them. There's not one here. So I can't say exactly what Annette Hamilton is.
Well, we do have the phrase appearing in the book of First John, chapter 2 and chapter 2 and chapter 4 both speak about the hours late. You've heard there's many antichrists that have gone out into the world. So you do have that phraseology. And so that's why it's important, as we discussed right at the beginning, is that, John is writing this in the first century. And so what is true, again, as Hebrews 1 says, that from the time that Jesus left in the first century till now is the last days. That is true. And so the late hour, what you have in the book of First John, is another one of those things that is very true. So again, the Bible says what it says. We don't want to deny that. But we also recognize that there's been 2,000 years of history. And we have the end of the age language which I think is probably more applicable to what we're living in. And so in taking that terminology, the late hour, what we do see is that in First John, it says there's many antichrists that have gone out into the world. But then in chapter 4, it talks about the spirit of the antichrist. So we do know that in every single time frame, whatever generation, maybe age, if you wanted to say it that way, from the first century on, Satan has always had the antichrist spirit working. And he's ready to implement his person he wants to be ready at all times. But now as we're coming into really the end of the age after 2,000 years of history, we begin to see again, if you were to fast forward, let's say to 90 AD, well, certainly the Rome was there and there was a lot of wickedness and stuff, but now the temple's gone, Israel's gone, and a lot of these things could not be fulfilled anymore. Now the rapture we know can happen at any time, but as it relates to the second coming, I always used to like to ask the church where I was pastoring, could Jesus come back today and set up his earthly kingdom? And the answer is no, because the word of God will not fail. Jesus says, heaven and earth pass away, but my word will never fail. We have to have all of those things fulfilled. The book of Revelation has to be fulfilled. Those are all in reference to his actual second coming to earth and setting up the kingdom. Now, the rapture can happen anytime. It's a signless event. We talk about that, the doctrine of imminency that can happen at any moment. So that's not connected to any signs. So when we think about the last hour, no doubt clearly, as we look at Israel being back in the land, all these preparations for the temple, everything's done. The wickedness, the spirit of Antichrist, globalism, the technology, Revelation 13 as it relates to the mark of the beast, digital currencies, one world currency, cash society, all these things come to play that are far different than 100 years ago.
Right.
So we're seeing, you used the word earlier, what makes this hour different and the end of the age or the last days of the last days is the convergence of every single sign. We don't have to make it up. We don't have to be sensationalistic because I'm really not that way. I'm not very dramatic. Every single sign is converging now like it has never been before.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, when I came to the Lord, I think it was 39 years ago, if I remember right. And when I came to the Lord and I started researching these things and listening so much to Hal Lindsey back in the day as well, but there were things that were happening, things that were stage setters, if you would, but wow, I think the stage was still kind of being maybe even built at that point. But now I look at it like the stage is built here, and now the props and the actors and actresses and everything, now it's really coming together even more so. I mean, hey, when I started looking at this stuff, you'd find an article here, you'd find an article there, one thing, whatever it might be. Now, my goodness, it's hard to keep up. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, the frequency, the intensity, all of those kinds of things. So I do believe that it's getting close for sure. I really do. Hey, Life Clips on here asks, thoughts on if we could see the third temple being built current day before we fly, or before the rapture.
That's such a great question. I'm glad that Kim asked that question because oftentimes we as we're followers of Jesus. We're prophecy watchers, right? All of us, we're watching these things as Jesus told us, Mark 13:37. I say to you, I say to everybody, watch. Okay, so we know that. But it's also important to have very precise theological explanation. So what do we know? All we know is in Daniel 9:27 that in the middle of the week, the prince who is to come that confirms the covenant puts a stop to the sacrifices. That's all we know as it relates to time. We know that in the middle of the point of the tribulation, that the abomination of desolation is set up in the holy place. We know that. 2 Thessalonians 2, we don't really have an exact time frame of when he's going to declare himself to be God. But what we do know is by the midpoint, there's a temple there. Now, how long have they been offering sacrifices? 1 day, 1 year, 10 years, 20 years? The Bible doesn't tell us. All we know is at the midpoint, it is there. So that's what makes it even more interesting, is that we don't know. We could watch the temple be completely built. We could start watching them do sacrifices. And that doesn't mean that we've entered the tribulation. It doesn't mean anything like that. We do not know how long it's going to be here. So we could watch it or we could not see it. All we know is midpoint, it's in operation. Other than that, the details are scant.
Right. Yeah. That's great. Hey, Caroline Johnson, her question is, will the Jews do all the purification rituals for this next temple because they think the Antichrist is the true Messiah?
I'm not sure if I follow the question. I mean, if they think the Antichrist... Oh, okay. Let me follow it. Well, a couple things that I find interesting here. In John 5:43, Jesus said, I have come in my Father's name, and you didn't receive me. Another is going to come in his own name, and him you will receive. So when you talk to prophecy teachers, you say, well, what is that in reference to? And most of them will say, well, that's in reference to the Antichrist, which I would agree, that there's going to be someone that they will receive. And you think, well, what does that look like? Receive. That's kind of interesting. We know what it means to receive Jesus. And we also know that they didn't receive Jesus as their Messiah. So the implication there is because they didn't receive Jesus as their Messiah when he came in the name of his Father, this other person they will receive as Messiah, and he'll come in his own name, whatever that looks like. And so when you see the figure, that's why whoever the figure is on that day, he's going to have to offer them something where they receive him in some sort of official way. I mean, just like Jesus, they rejected him in Matthew 12. They accused him of casting out demons by Beelzebub, by this, and Jesus says, you've committed the unpardonable sin. So, and he judged them right there on the spot. He said, this is it. You guys are getting judgment. It will never be forgiven. And therefore, later at the triumphal entry, which we call the triumphal entry, I don't think it was very triumphal. He comes down and the crowd is worshiping. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And what does Jesus do? He cries, he weeps, because he says, it's hidden, guys. It's over. You lost it. You lost your opportunity. When you guys rejected me in Matthew 12, and you accused me of casting out, that was it. You received a judgment, and now it's hidden from your eyes. And so he wept over Jerusalem, even though that the crowd seemingly received him. But the fact of the matter is the leadership did not. And so there's coming a point in the future when the leadership is going to receive this Messiah type figure as Messiah, as deliverer, as rescuer. And I think in 2 Thessalonians 2, that it says this, the day of the Lord cannot come until the apostasy comes first, and then the man of sin is revealed. I actually think that the apostasy that's being referenced there is not so much related to the church. We have that in 1 Timothy 4. Many will depart from the faith. But I think the apostasy being referred there is when they receive this guy and he's revealed at who he is. And then the day of the Lord initiates. So I think in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, you have this phraseology that they will receive him. Now, going back to the purification, when they have the ashes, they will be able to purify all the area and the rest of the priests who are already trained and ready. So I hope maybe that's what she's referring to there specifically.
Right, right. And by the way, when we're talking about Second Thessalonians 2 there, and we're talking about the falling away in verse 3, even a bit of the debate there
Hmm.
in prophecy circles, is that actually speaking of the apostasy, apostasia meaning the falling away, or is that speaking of departure? So
Hmm.
is it departure from the faith? Is it the departure of God's people departing? So there's different views on that as well, just to put that out there. But as she asked, will the Jews do all the purification rituals for this next temple because they think the Antichrist is the true, well, they will think that the Antichrist is the true Messiah.
Yep.
So we know that
Yep.
they will. I don't believe that they're going to be doing the purification rituals necessarily having to do with the man of lawlessness. I believe that they're going to be doing that because they believe that that's what they need to do for that temple, which will be the
Hmm.
Antichrist temple. Which, by the way, that's something that I know a number of times Christians are like, well, let's put some funds over here and move this thing along. That's the beast. That's not going to be the temple. That's going to be Christ's temple during the 1,000-year reign. Okay.
Absolutely.
So
Yep. There's,
I don't want to support this.
yeah, it's
Support
interesting
missions,
because
guys.
one of the things that I'm my final chapter in the book that I've already got. What I did is I sent an email out to many of well-known prophecy teachers, and I asked them a few questions. I said, "Hey, I'm working on this book." I said, "But there's a lot of confusion out there as it relates to how a Christian should or shouldn't be involved in the temple." Now, granted, the fact that the temple preparations are there, that Red Heifer is seemingly close, that is exciting. It's exciting because it reveals to us again that we're at the end of the age and the rapture is coming soon. But at the same time, are we excited that the Jews are going to be deceived by this Antichrist figure and they're going to be following the pattern of Moses, which is the old covenant, which has been annulled and abolished and removed, as the book of Hebrews teaches? So we're not excited about that. But one of the things I ask these prophecy teachers is, as a Christian, a follower of the new covenant, a follower of Jesus, Jesus' final and sacrifice, what are the limits of a Christian? Can we donate money? Should we donate money? Is it allowed? Would God be upset if we helped build the temple? Would God be upset if I gave money to the ranchers to help them develop the red heifer? So it's interesting. I got all these answers back from these prophecy teachers, and I was honestly surprised. Man, they have a variety of different opinions all over the map. Some are pretty strong. It's godless. Don't touch it. It's a sin almost. Others are going, hey, not necessarily. We can't be that dogmatic on it because we're helping prophecy be fulfilled. So, anyways, I'll share all those because I asked them, can I share this publicly? And I'll be able to say, hey, pick your favorite prophecy teacher. Here's what they say, and then you run with it.
Yeah, and by the way, God doesn't need our help in moving His timeline around.
Mhm.
you know, for sure. Let's see here. I saw one from Ski the Hebrew. Question is King. I've seen this again recently somewhere. Is King Charles the Antichrist?
You know, That's funny because I've been reading about him being the Antichrist since the late 90s. But interestingly, I would probably say no. And now, here's why. Because, and this is not dogmatic by any means. I don't have some special revelation. But people are familiar with his speech that he gave in one of the World Economic Forum or something like that. It was like whatever he did, wherever it was some global organization. And he's reading his prepared speech, and he says, talking about climate change and money and taxes, and he said, we need to have the money. Trillions will be at his disposal. And you're like, wait, who's his?
Right.
That's kind of weird. Who is the his? And interestingly, yesterday I was talking to a cousin of mine who's a pastor, and he said, "Hey, check this out." So I put on Google and I put on King Charles. There will be millions at his disposal, and I did a Google search, and it came up and it said 600,000 hits, but there were no hits. It was like blank, and I was like, I've never seen that before. Where searching for something specific, it said there were thousands of hits, but it didn't. You know how it gives you like the first 10 and then you go to the next? It was blank. And I sent it to several other people and I said, try this. And it was just interesting. Was it coincidence? I have no idea. I found it fascinating. But the fact that King Charles would make reference to somebody else in the third person, his disposal, would seemingly imply that it was not him, that he's in service of whoever the him is.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I had seen that clip when that had come out. It was sometime last year, if I remember right. Um, I could swear when he had done that, but again, this is just my thought, my opinion. Is
Mhm.
I think the now King Charles is just too unlikable. I don't think anybody
Right.
likes the guy. I really don't even know. Does anybody even really listen to this guy? Again, that's just my opinion. I mean, you go in England, and I don't know where they stand right now, months after the Queen has passed
Mhm.
away and before his coronation and everything, but nobody even wanted the guy to be king. They wanted to pass it on
Right.
to the son. It's like, is there some way we can just skip this guy? Just forget it. Just pass it along because nobody likes this guy at all. So I don't know. So that would just be my opinion, but I don't know. you know.